just because I know what the law says, I know what the Bible teaches, and I know what the sin is, like that does not in and of itself justify me or grant me access to Christ,
Yeah.
right? It is back to what you started us with in chapter one. It is because I then also do those things that I know to be true,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is ultimately what will lead to that. And so, like, yeah, I can know this Bible front and back.
Mm-hmm.
There are probably seminary professors who are still going to hell, that
Absolutely.
like can teach the Bible like it's as experts and still not know Jesus, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
same way that there were Pharisees who just knew the law
Mm-hmm.
backwards and forward, but still did not know Jesus. Yo, welcome back to the Vibes Daily Podcast. It is day 323 of our year-long series we have titled Devoted, as we journey through the entire Bible from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation. You have joined us here in the book of Romans, and I am back and joined by my wife, Victoria, as we pick up on this new book and this really new genre of scripture that begins here with the book of Romans, known as the epistles or letters that are written to the church.
Yeah.
And so over the next few weeks, we will be in a few different letters.
Yeah.
And most of them are written by the Apostle Paul, who we will get introduced to, or we were introduced to in Acts. And we'll hear some of his writings here starting in Romans. But just before we get too deep into that, as always, we like to start our week off with a question just to get the mind going and learn a little bit. And you offered up this question from the book of Romans specifically, which deals a lot with just kind of our sin nature, and the idea of grace and salvation and the law and all these other things that we'll talk about here. So question simply is, what sin in your life that maybe you were a slave to, as Paul will kind of talk about here, are you most grateful to God for delivering you from?
Yeah, so for me, it would definitely be like pride and vanity. Like, I thought so highly of myself, like, right? Like, whether it was intellectually or fashion or, I don't know, just like who I was. Like, I was the prize in my mind to everyone around me. And so, and I thought I always had the answers to the fact that, like you said, you know this, but like, some of my line sisters have my name in their phone as know-it-all, right? Like, because I just thought I knew it all. And even like some of the things I remember saying, like looking back, almost 10, 15 years now, right, ago, I'm like, I was so off. Like, that wasn't even the right answers.
Yeah.
But I think I'm most grateful for that not being a part of my life anymore because of how much in scripture, especially reading it again this year, that we see how much God is against the proud, right? Like how much he really does oppose the proud. There's many nations he took down because of their pride, many kings that he took down because of their pride and their vanity. And so it just pains me to think that like I was ever in opposition of the Lord, like right, that we were face to face. And as much as I wanted to say like, oh, I was a Christian, I wasn't living like it, and I was actually like being opposed by the Lord at the moment. So
yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah. For me, and I, honestly, like pride is one that I struggle with. I'll never forget a young lady in high school looking me dead in my face and just saying, "You are so arrogant." And I could not disagree with her. I just couldn't. It was definitely, I loved me some me. I thought very highly of myself as well. So grateful for that. But I think the one that just came top of mind was just really, I mean, I guess just large term or overarching term is just sexual immorality. Like, I just think there was a part of my life or a season of my life where I just really viewed sex in a way that probably the world established for me, versus the way that God established. And it was something that just took a lot of God working through to even just change my perspective on it. And I think I'm most grateful for it because like one of the things that, you talked about kind of what you've learned through scripture as far as how pride actively, has you opposed to God. But I think sexual morality, like which we'll actually read about in the next book, he talks about kind of a sin against one's own body.
Yeah.
But I also think like one of the things that I learned was I feel like it's also it also hurts people.
Yeah.
Like, and it can be a sin against others. And I think it's one of the things that I probably most regret, in my past is I do regret how I may have perhaps hurt someone, just through the way that the soul ties and some of the like just the challenges that come out of it that, yeah, I mean, whether it was people in the past or even just in our own marriage, which we've had conversations about before, like just some of that. So again, I'm grateful that I just don't have those same, struggles and pulls and challenges, things that, again, won't go all into detail here, but that like I'm very open about. Like if people want to talk about it, I have no problem having that conversation because I think, as we learned from Paul's story last book, as he just went back and did not hide from the fact that he was persecuting Christians and was killing people.
That testimony matters.
Yeah. So like I have no problem having that conversation because it is truly a way that God has changed me, and we'll love to talk about it again. Just maybe it's not the best forum for that, but yeah, I think that's probably the one I'm just really grateful for because I think like not just again in the past, but yeah, I could really harm my family, like all this stuff that if I was really still a slave to some of that stuff.
Just to put it out there, I mean, you'd be harmed, but I mean, we're just gonna let that ride because that's not happening. Because that's what you're free.
You just ruined my moment.
I'm sorry.
You just made it about you. But,
I'm still working on myself.
Yeah, but praise the Lord for my deliverance. So that my life is not in danger, I guess. Anyway,
you can continue.
Wages of sin is death. We will get to that. This book, Romans, a letter written to Christians in the city of Rome, obviously the capital city of this empire, this Roman Empire here at the time. It feels as if, as you read it, that it's primarily written to Jewish Christians. Mm-hmm. So Christians who were previously Jewish, or I guess are Jewish still by like ethnicity, but are converted or now Christ followers. Because as you read the content, there seems to be like his audience are specifically Jewish people. But this, like many of the other letters that we will see, is often in response to an idea or maybe a letter he received or rumors he heard or a situation he becomes aware of, that he would often write, a church and a community of people to give them instructions for how to handle it, or understanding of, what we now know or consider doctrine, right? Which is just how we understand certain Christian principles and ideas. And Romans is really a foundational one for a lot of it, particularly with just the idea of sin, grace, salvation, judgment, God's love, like really just some of those basic things with an understanding of kind of that. So that's what we get here in the book of Romans. And it starts in chapter 1, very clearly identifying that Paul is the author, right? He says it kind of here in the beginning, which is characteristic of his letters. And he starts by just kind of talking about how he wishes and longs to see them, this church, and to visit this church, but kind of had some stuff in between that has happened. Again, another characteristic, these are letters, right? So we will see them very much addressed to a specific group and addressing issues that specific group has had. And so like, even the way it's formatted, you can tell it was written as a letter, right? Like I hope to visit you, not necessarily super theological for us. That's something that really helps us.
Yeah.
But in the context of his letter, it was important. But what sometimes you hear in chapter 1, as he first addresses this Romans church and then starts to kind of lay the foundation of what this letter will be about.
Yeah. His intros and greetings are always so long. It's like he's greeting and let me just establish this is who I am. This is what I came to talk about. That's so interesting. But the first thing that like really just jumped out was this imparting of some spiritual gift to strengthen you. And this was in verse 11.
Yeah.
And that this spiritual gift that he's talking about, I'm assuming, is this gift of encouragement, right? Like, that is that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, right? By yours and by mine. So, like, just the fact that he wants to come and, like, gift them, right? That, like, he's not coming to take. He's not coming to, can't wait to, get something from you guys. But, like, he's longing to impart something to them. And so I think that was the first thing that jumped out for me.
Yeah. No, I love that verse too. And I think, like, it made me think of just like church on Sundays, like, and just this idea that, like, there is something special just about being together and in person, and like how there is this mutually encouraging piece. Like, I don't know if, we try to say it, but like, I don't know if our church community knows how much they encourage us when they're here. You know what I'm saying? Like, how much I just feel this, like, this boost, kind of when they're present, and then even after they leave, it's like that just that encourages us. And and hopefully the other, the opposite is true as well, right? That when they're with us, that we can encourage them and so, like, I just loved that line specifically, because it is just like, we are encouraged by each other's faith, by each other's presence, by these things that, like, I'd love to see when somebody is believing God for something. Like, that encourages me to believe him for something, right? That kind of thing. So I did love that line, because it just made me think of the beauty of the church and just being together, and what's kind of possible when we're together in that way. So yeah. I think the other thing that really jumped is a kind of a verse that has become popular of late, just because of particular Christian hip hop group 116, right, which is Reach Records, and them, because it's Romans 1:16 that essentially that they kind of quote often, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then also to the Greek. Like, particularly after some of the conversation we've had with Acts, and just that idea of just being unashamed of the gospel, like boldly proclaiming it. I think it just resonated with me, because I think this is one of the things that I'm, like, personally really like reflecting on and chewing on how I can be more of that, how I can be more bold and unashamed in every space and place that I'm in. And so I think that verse stuck out to me as well. But anything else here?
That was a good fun fact. I had no clue that's what 116 meant.
Oh, you didn't know that's what they...
I had zero clue.
Really? You don't remember Unashamed? Like, you don't remember the song Unashamed from, like, when we was in high school? No? Really?
No, you just dropped something in my whole spirit right there.
That is...
Did not know. And I was like, what? For real? Yeah.
That's...
So, I had no clue. So that was good. That's a great nugget. Thank you for enlightening me, encouraging me. Yes.
I did not know you were aware of that.
I was not aware. The things that you, like, well, we've had conversations lately about acronyms and stuff. I feel like I'm just really naive. I'm just out here living.
That's hilarious. All right. Well, yes, that is where that group, that is what 116 comes from.
Yeah.
Romans 1:16.
Awesome. Well, I agree. I think in this culture, though, in general, I feel like in my life, I am very much a chameleon. I can very much code switch and blend in and be, and you know who I'm talking to based on my tone, right? Like, I really switch. Like, my personality sometimes switch, and not like I'm fake or I'm not the same person. I'm me, but my tone will switch. How I use my words, how excited I am, how it switches because I'm just used to adapting. So even in spaces where I'm aware that they are not believers like I am, like I might hold my tongue where I usually normally I'm just like, yes, Lord, or like, I might not do that. I might be like, yes, and just leave out the Lord part, right? Or like, because of not wanting to seem different or out and not blend in, it really struck me. Like at one point, like I was having lunch with a friend, and I was just like, really, should this be the person like I'm around if I feel ashamed to bow my head and say grace right now at the table during lunch, right? So yeah, I was super convicted in that. And so yeah, I think the Lord has been working on me, is continuously working on me to really be unashamed and boldly a Christian, because that's not my nature. My nature is to blend in, to fit in whatever, social setting I'm in.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah, I probably have some of that. Like, I don't know what the root of that is kind of for you. For me, it probably comes from some people pleasing, like just a desire to not want to ruffle feathers, right? And not want to stir the pot. Like, this is a general, I avoid conflict, type of person and personality that, yeah, I do. I want to pray. I mean, I going back to even Acts in, chapter 4, when they prayed for that boldness, which says to me that if they needed to pray for it, they didn't feel like they had it on their own, right? So I just feel like I want to say that, have that same prayer, so I can also claim, like Paul, that I am unashamed, right?
Yeah.
That's good. Anything else in chapter 1 jump out to you?
Just this God's wrath on unrighteousness. It did bring out to me, this verse 18 and down, that like everyone is unrighteous. Like everyone is trapped by sin. Like don't even think for a second that he's not talking to somebody here. He's talking, this goes out to everyone that well,
he tried to cover every base. Okay, he tried to cover every base.
He did, right? And like in this wrath of God is going to meet everyone, right? At some point for something. And the fact that, like, verse 24, he says, like, he just gives them up to the lust of their hearts, right? Like, at some point, God just has given, and that's what, like, I know some of the arguments are, like, the questions, which are valid, like, why is the world how it is, right? Like, number one, sin came into the world, wasn't God's plan, wasn't his desire, but he did. With that brought death, right? And we're going to talk through that, what the repercussions of that is. But then, like, he's giving people chance after chance after chance to, like, come back to him or to be righteous or to follow his laws. And they just continue to rebel. So at some point, he's just like, I'm just going to give you up to the desire of your heart. Like, you just want to be out here. So I'm just going to let you be out here.
And I think, like, verse 21 I thought was really interesting. And then I'm going to get to that piece there, because verse 21 says, for they knew God, or though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, four-footed animals, and reptiles. And so, like, he starts with this idea, like, they were aware of God, but they still chose not to worship him as God. Right. And to actually follow him as God, and instead chose to worship these idols, these, carved images, or whatever the case may be. And to your point, like, yes, then he's just like, all right, well, fine. I'm just going to give you over to these things that you already desire in your flesh. And it made me think of just like, so much of our lives and these understandings of God does come from, like, parenting for me, but it does make me think of just like those times where one of our kids maybe is jumping on the couch over and over again, and we keep telling them to stop jumping on the couch, and like at some point I'm just like, you know what, you're gonna hurt yourself and you're gonna learn to stop jumping on the couch, like, or you're not gonna learn to stop jumping on the couch, but either way, like, at some point I can only tell you to stop jumping on the couch so many times. and I'm just gonna let you deal with the consequences of your own actions, right? And I think like the reason I bring up the kids is because there's something just innate in them that just desires to do some of that quote unquote fun or risky things, right? Yeah. Like there's nothing that has to be taught. Like I don't have to teach them to want to jump off of stuff or you know, swing things or running. Like I don't have to teach them that. There's just this innate piece as a child, particularly our boys, right, to want to do some of those things. And I feel like Paul's making the argument that like, yes, in our flesh there's just this natural desire to do like depravity, like in like sinful things. Like there's just, and again, ours, to your point, covering the bases, like everybody's maybe different, right, as far as what those natural inclinations and desires are, but there is something just natural in our flesh to want to do those things. And so God does just say, okay, well, I will allow you, I will just give you over to those things that you already desire. Yeah. And then like he goes through this whole list and deals with first the sexual immorality pieces and some of the passions there, but then just goes through everything from, you know, greed to wickedness to slander to division to gossip to disobedience to parents to pride and boastful. I mean, he goes through the list. He's just list. Like you said, everybody should find something in themselves.
Absolutely.
Like something in themselves in this list, because he's like, this is essentially what you became.
Yeah.
Because God allowed you to just be slaves to your own sin and only sin in your life.
And in that very last sentence, after he gets done with saying all that, all the lists that you just mentioned, it's like they don't. Not only do they do these things, but they give approval to those who do them too, right? They're cheering others on, and I think that is also the thing. Is like, okay, go off and do that on yourself. But don't start trying to create a culture of like desensitization. Like this is okay for everyone to do.
Yeah, which is the world we live in right now.
It is, absolutely.
Right? It is absolutely the world you live in. You are celebrated and elevated for sin. Like in the sins that you do. And I mean, it's the world I existed in for a time in a season, right? Where like, you know, you were celebrated or patted on the back, or they're telling stories about you if you do sinful things. Like nobody's out here celebrating you because you went and fed the homeless for the weekend. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like, okay, that's cool. You know, like,
or you never argue with people. You never get in fights. Yeah, you're always gentle.
Nobody's.
They're not gonna make a TV show out of you. I'm sorry. They're gonna say you're boring. Yeah, like they want the people scrapping.
Yeah. So it is interesting that that's the case. But chapter 2, he then tells us though, because again, it's not broken up really in chapters as he writes it. So this is a continuous thought.
He has the longest run-on thoughts ever. Like, I know we have like subtitles here in chapters, but his thought process is never ending. I'm sorry.
It's one letter.
It's one letter, but it's one continuous thought, like, and another thing. It's just like as if you're just sitting here talking to me for like 20 minutes.
I mean, it's not a conversation, so.
It's definitely not. It's like you're just talking to me.
It is a monologue.
It's a monologue.
So, yeah, I mean, it kind of makes some sense here. But but then he kind of goes on about dealing with judgment and, you know, not really thinking to ourselves that we are without sin, right? And that he's ultimately going to, each one of us are going to be accountable for our own works, essentially, and our own sin. Anything jump out to you here in chapter 2 in this first part before we kind of get into the law and the Jewish part of it?
Yeah, I think the first part is this question in verse 3, like, do you really think that you're going to escape the judgment of God, right? And that God's restraint and his kindness is often to just lead us to repentance.
I loved that line so much.
Don't you? Like, it was so good. Like, God's kindness is meant to lead to your repentance. Like, but because of your hard heart.
Verse 4, by the way. We keep on.
Verse 4, I'm sorry, yeah. But because of your hard heart, right? You are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of judgment. Like, God's trying to be kind so that you can see that he is a good God. And I think the line that comes out to me about this is with in that clip that you showed me again on the sermon of Pastor Philip Anthony Mitchell, where he says that we are deceived by grace, right? They're like we think that, you know, we're okay and we're getting over, and what we're doing is not that bad, because God is so gracious that he has not just struck us down by fire, right? Like, he is not this wrathful, vengeful person that we try to make him to be, right? We think that this Old Testament God versus this New Testament God is different. No, we saw lots of grace in the Old Testament when we were reading through.
Yeah.
Like, lots of years and years of just destructive behavior and worshiping a Baal, and he just let them be, but kept trying to show them that he was their provider and their sustainer. And every time they did call on him to go fight their battles or to go into war for them, like, he showed up.
Yeah.
And like, that kindness to them wasn't so that they can just go off, get the spoil and the plunder, and to go and use it to worship Baal some more. Like, it was to show them, like, I'm God, come back to me. And even in our own lives, he's doing that to this day. But I think we just keep living life like, well, nothing happened to me. Like, I must not be that bad, because, I mean, he hasn't struck me down. Like, I'm still around. Like, I still have the things that I need. And so life is lifing, right? And so,
yeah.
I think, well, yeah, jump in though.
Well, no, I think it made me think of, there's a common feeling in our kind of like human relationships that, like, or even just a common fear that we will be taken advantage of, right? That, like, if I do for someone, or I'm kind to them, or whatever, and they misuse it or abuse it or don't appreciate it, and that if I do for them again, like, they're just going to continue to take advantage of me, right? And they're going to use me, and whatever case it be. And it's so interesting, because essentially what Paul is arguing is that is how we treat God.
Yes.
Like, we mistake and misuse, again, just his kindness and his mercy and his grace towards us, and just assume, because he is that way, that we can just keep going back. Like, we know he's going to forgive us. So, I mean, might as well, right? Like, do this.
Do it and ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah, like, might as well, because I know he's going to forgive us, and I know he loves, and I know he's gracious, I know he's kind, and he didn't strike me down yet, right? I didn't, whatever. I didn't crash the car when I drove drunk last time, and nobody died. So, hey, might as well do it again, right? Or I didn't, nobody at work caught me when I showed up high. You know what I'm saying? I didn't get reprimanded, so might as well do it again, right? Like, whatever the case may be, like, we just kind of assume his grace in those situations. It's his kindness. And I'm like, it's crazy how much we fear that as people, but yet we'll treat God that same way. Absolutely. And that's kind of what it made me think of. But yeah, I mean, I think he goes in after that to just really kind of point out that this is where it becomes the idea that, like, this audience is clearly Jewish that he's talking to, because there seems to be a misunderstanding with, like, the Jewish law and how that in any way kind of, I don't know if it just says separate, but maybe elevates the Jewish followers of Jesus from the Gentiles. And the verse that really transitions this is verse 11, where he just kind of says there is no favoritism with God. Like, God doesn't have a favorite. And he starts to then go into the idea that, like, although you are a Jew and there are some things that are different, and even some things that are unique and valuable, like, you are not more valuable to God than the Gentile, and kind of goes into some of those things, and even talks about what it looks like, what circumcision really looks like, and of the heart versus of the flesh, and just some of those things. So I don't know, what jumps onto you in the rest of 2 before we get into 3?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to me, just those first few verses that you're pointing out, from 11 to like 13ish, that, like, they have this law, and like you said, they've been given this law, And some of them have prided themselves, right, on having this law. But like it says, for it's not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified.
Yeah.
And I think that continues to ring in my mind as we read this Bible, that like you mentioned so many times before in this podcast, like this is not optional.
Yeah.
Like this is not, you just preached this last week. This is not just a suggestion,
Yeah.
right? A recommendation.
Yeah.
Like this is a command. And so I also don't want to be like, yeah, look at them. You need to be doers. And I'm doing the same thing when reading this Bible and hearing these words, seeing these words, taking them in, even taking notes on it, right? But yet I'm still a gossip or a slanderer or a hate. You know, I'm still haughty. I'm still boastful. I'm inventor of evil. I'm disobedient to my parents. I'm fully like all these things. Let me not just hear it and then just disregard all the things that the Lord is bringing up as things that he is opposed to, right? And so I think that was just the first thing that just jumped out to me here.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think that is Paul's big idea, even when it comes to the circumcision piece, right? So he uses that just as a practical example.
Yes.
It's not even necessarily like circumcision is such a big deal that he had to deal with it. But one, it's probably what came up in maybe some of the conversation before, or it's just, this is a example that you guys all completely understand. And so to that point, he's just like, hey, at the end of the day, the circumcision is really just an outward display. It's a flesh. It's a kind of physical representation. But if the heart itself is not actually changed, you're not actually set apart in that way, then it means absolutely nothing to God,
Yes.
right? And I think like it is something that's just like, it's very relatable to today, because it's like, yeah, you can show up to church, pay your tithes, volunteer, serve in ministry, right? Do all those things and still have a heart that is far from God.
Right? I think to me, I kind of correlated to just saying I'm a Christian, right? Versus them, their elevation of, oh, I'm circumcised and I'm right with God, and our elevation of saying I'm a Christian, I have salvation, but I haven't really accepted God in doing anything. I'm still habitually sinning.
Yeah. And can I also, like, the other thing that I just felt was so interesting about this idea that this was so divisive is that, like, it's not even like circumcision was a conscious decision by the males, right? Because it happened on the 8th day of birth, right?
Yeah.
So, like, this was something that their parents essentially decided for them. So to your point on I'm a Christian, it's essentially like saying I grew up in the church.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like my parents, I don't know, baptized me at a week old, right? And said I'm a Christian. Like they declared this for me, and I grew up in the church and I've been in the church, and I want to like use that as some sort of badge of honor, that I get to wear into heaven. And he's essentially like, no, like not if your heart hasn't actually changed.
Not if you're still breaking the laws. Right.
And still doing that. So, but chapter 3, he kind of goes into, but because of that, all right, so the Jews are like, it's to your point of like the run-on thoughts, I think it's because he is just like, he's anticipating the objections that they will have.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because he's anticipating what they're going to say back to him on these things. So he assumes that like they're going to be frustrated because they're like, well, I thought the Jews were God's chosen people and set apart for a purpose. So how are you going to tell me that we and the Gentiles are essentially the exact same, like according to God? And so he addresses that and he says, look, there is actually some benefit, right? At the end of the day, they are God's chosen people who were entrusted with the very words of God. Like there is something unique and special and different about that. And that's something that's worth, but it's not necessarily something to be like boastful about, right? And even if we have that title or that distinction, does that give us an excuse to be unfaithful or to not follow the law? Like, of course it doesn't, right? We're ultimately justified by our righteousness and those good things. And so he kind of goes into that a little bit in chapter 3. What jumped out to you here as he breaks that part down for this Jewish audience?
Yeah, because like I said, he mentions, yeah, you guys were entrusted with the word of God. Great. Like you said, big honor. Which is kind of like, to me, I keep on trying to like, okay, what does this mean for me? Because I'm not a Jew, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, yes, as Christians, we are entrusted with the gospel, right? But it goes on to me, and this is part is interesting to me. Like you said, it's like if we are unrighteous, and even God can get the glory through our unrighteousness, or if we sin and still something, it works together for the good of God, right? And for His glory, and He can still show Himself as who He is, even in my sin, and He can even take my evil and work it out for good. Well, what's the point of doing good? I can just still do what I want to do, and God can still be glorified, right? And so I think, like I said, this anticipation of this argument that he has is like, so why not continue to do evil so that good can come? And I think it, even to me, just goes back to this like verse, chapter 2, verse 5, where he's just explaining that like there's still going to be some type of like consequence, right? Like there's still a day of wrath coming. Like the Lord has this day of wrath that's coming. So like even all of these offenses, like a day of wrath is coming, right? And that like nobody's righteous, so we can't like become righteous by the things that we do, but like it's still something that God is like requiring of us to teach the world, right? Like and it still tears us away from Him, and like He still doesn't want to be separated from Him. Like we still want to be close to God because He loves us, right? But yeah, I think it was just interesting, like this thought process that he has is like, no, just stop trying to slide back into sin and justify why you can just slide back into sin.
Yeah, and I think like it seemed as if the misunderstanding they had was that because they were aware of sin and had knowledge of sin, that somehow freed them from the consequence of sin.
Right.
Like that their knowledge of the law and awareness of it is what ultimately saved them, is what they kind of believed, right? Or justified them, I would say. But I think he makes the argument that like, no, the whole point of the law was really just to make you aware of your sin.
Yeah.
But it does not save you from your sin.
Yeah.
And that like ultimately that is why it's important for us to all still know that we all have sinned, right?
Yes.
Like all of us are sinners. And none of us are righteous, Jew or Gentile. But it's only through the Jews that the Gentiles become aware of their sin, right?
Yes.
In the same way that the Jews should also be aware of their sin. And so like, I think it is one of those things that again, it's probably tough to or important for us to like acknowledge, particularly those of us that like have grown up in the church or have the church background, that just because I know what the law says, I know what the Bible teaches, and I know what the sin is, like that does not in and of itself justify me or grant me access to Christ.
Yeah.
Right. It is back to what you started us with in chapter 1. It is because I then also do those things that I know to be true. Right. That is ultimately what will lead to that. And so like, yeah, I just think it's clear that their misunderstanding is one that we probably still deal with or struggle with, which is that like, I can know this Bible front and back. There are probably seminary professors who are still going to hell,
Absolutely.
that like can teach the Bible like it's as experts and still not know Jesus, right? In the same way that there were Pharisees who just knew the law backwards and forward, but still did not know Jesus. And so I think that's the thing. And then of course the big call out is, Romans 3:23 is a famous verse, right? We all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, right? Like it is, all of us have. There's no one who is righteous, not even one. And the sooner we know that and accept that, the sooner we are in a posture to receive the salvation that God offers us.
Yeah. Like you said, and like this grace is a gift, right? Like that we can get only through Jesus.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's interesting how much explaining he does of this. And sometimes it's really easy to just read over these words and not sit in it. So like I just feel like taking like one thing on like Francis Chan like really encourages people to do is just sit and wrestle with it. So I know we're going fast through the Bible this year, but like if we have time, just sit with this, just, I don't know, I encourage everyone to just sit to see what this means for your life.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Well, we're not done. We'll continue tomorrow. That was the last chapter for today's reading. We'll pick up on chapter 4 tomorrow and continue this idea of faith and justification and grace and all these other ideas.
And what to do with the law now. Because now the question is, well, what good is the law now for all sinners?
Yeah. So we'll kind of talk through that a little bit more. But again, we appreciate you joining us today on the Vibes Daily Podcast. Come back and see us tomorrow as we pick up on chapter 4 and continue our way through the book of Romans. Until then, take care.
Thank you for joining us for the Vibes Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the Vibes Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.